My privilege now to introduce Joe Avila, who is the Regional Executive Director for Prison Fellowship, and he will introduce our speaker for today, Joe Avila.
In my time in prison, one of the first books I ever picked up, actually I picked up two. The Bible was the first one, and I decided I wouldn't read anything until I got through that. But the second book was a very high and intellectual book published by Avon Publishers. It's a book written by Og Mandino, and it's called The World's Greatest Miracle. And it's an allegorical book in my mind. And what Og talks about is a rag picker, the hero, a rag picker. A gentleman that would pick up a life who has just been completely destroyed, just like I would pick up a dirty rag on the street. And you know what Jesus mentions, the dirty rags on the street in the Bible. They were filthy rags. But anyway, this rag picker picks up a rag, and he washes it, and he mends it, and he bleaches it, and makes it look new again. That is a story of Bob Williamson, where he was ambushed by Jesus through the Bible because his curiosity to the Bible, he wanted to know for a fact that the Bible was not real. So he picked up the Bible, and he was ambushed by Jesus because he changed his life. And in my mind, he says, you know what? He was one of the rags in the gutter, totally destroyed, picked up by Jesus, cleaned, stretched, ironed, made new again. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Williamson.
Well, I've never been described as a rag before, but I understand what you're saying. It's a great analogy. Thank you for coming. I see there's a bunch of business people here. I'm currently writing another book. I've written 19, and this is on faith-based businesses. So I was thinking about, I've started 20 businesses, and every one of them that I started, one of the first things I did is determine how I was going to end it. So I start with the end and then determine whether I'm going to try to sell it or keep it for a cash cow or what I'm going to do with it. So I've thought about it a lot, and I think that life is very similar to that. And one thing I hope you'll get out of this is you need to think about the end. You know, how's your life going to end? And I've been called an eternity thinker because I think about that a lot. The Bible tells us to do it. But my life was far different than most of yours. I came from a very dysfunctional family. My father was very, very mean to me. He didn't like me. I didn't find out. He died last year. He's 92. He took that secret to the grave with him. But I mean, he beat me and screamed at me for as long as I can remember. And it's kind of like if you take a dog and you chain him up and you scream at him and you beat him every day, you'll do one or two things. You'll either break him or you'll create a monster. So I became a monster. I fought all the time. When they first noticed something was wrong with me when I was just 5 years old, and they heard a commotion out back, went back there. I just nailed my pet rabbit to a shed and was standing out there laughing. It was very sadistic. I started fighting with fists. I went to brass knuckles. I went to a baseball bat, a .357 Magnum, and a sawed-off shotgun. And that was my progression. And I went to 19 different schools in about as many states. I went to 3 different high schools. I got married when I was 19. I was divorced by the time I was 20 with a son. And I went into the military to see if it would straighten me out. It didn't. 6 months later, I was in prison in Buffalo, New York, awaiting trial, court-martial for some very serious crimes. And so part of my defense or my legal proceedings was there were some psychiatrists that wanted to meet with me. And there were about 5 of them, as I recall. They were in a semicircle, kind of like these tables, and a little brown folding chair out there for me to sit in. And they had a big, thick jacket on me of all the trouble I'd been in. And they interviewed me for several hours, sent me back to my cell. The next day, the head psychiatrist called me back, and he asked me if I knew what a sociopath was. And I said, no, I don't believe so. And he said, well, it means you don't have a conscience. You have no remorse for anything you do. You're incapable of love. And if I had to guess, you're well on your way to becoming a serial killer. I said, well, what do I do about it? And he said, there's nothing you can do. It's incurable. And he said, I'm recommending that we discharge you from the service. So they kicked me out of the military. And when they did, I did my best to prove that diagnosis, I guess. I took to the streets. I went to Haight-Ashbury up here in San Francisco and got all involved with the drug revolution, and probably took LSD 1,000 times, and eventually I became a meth addict, intravenous. And I was living in New Orleans at the time. I was a big-time dealer. I was connected with the mob and selling blue morphine to the heroin users in the city of New Orleans. And I was very violent, and I was just really what you would describe stone cold. I was always armed, and nobody wanted to mess with me, I can tell you. There would be severe consequences. So the police knew about me. They couldn't catch me. And most people were too afraid to snitch on me, so they just decided to trump up a case and get me off the streets. They planted some drugs on me and arrested me. But their case fell apart eventually. I got out. I didn't learn anything in prison except how to be more violent and be a better criminal. So when I got out, I just increased the rage that was in me. I was full of hate and bitterness. I hated everything, everybody, including myself. My grandfather committed suicide, 2 of my uncles, and my only sibling, my brother Jim. And I wanted to commit suicide. I'd lost all hope. And so I started taking drugs, far more than I had ever taken them. I OD'd twice. I nearly died. My liver quit functioning for a week. One of the people I was working with in my drug dealing operation was a policeman. He was dirty, and he tipped me off that the police were looking for me. He actually showed me a picture of my mugshot. On the back it said I was armed, extremely dangerous, wanted for numerous felonies. And they were doing a sweep in the New Orleans French Quarter looking for me. So I decided I would get out of town and quick, and I did. All I had was a pillowcase and a change of clothes, and I was totally penniless. You could ride a bus for a nickel in New Orleans, and I was walking down the street and I saw a nickel, so I got a bus ride out to the outskirts of New Orleans, and then I hitchhiked up to Atlanta, Georgia. I came in the town in a real seedy section of town, and the street it was Lucky Street, and it was right on the intersection of Fairly and Lucky. So I always thought it was fairly lucky I went up there, because Atlanta was very good to me. But I sold a pint of blood when I got there. I got a job cleaning bricks with a hatchet to get enough money to get a little flop house. And not long after that, I went out and I had a head-on collision in a car crash. And I was very nearly killed. My head went through the windshield. I knocked that door off with my left shoulder, my chest, my sternum, broke the steering wheel off. And my right leg was behind me pointing down at a funny angle with the bone protruding. So I was in this charity hospital. The name of it was Grady Hospital in Atlanta for quite some time. So I'm an insomniac. That means I don't sleep at night, 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours at the most. I've been like that since I was a little small child. So to while away the time, I would read, and I've read thousands of books. I didn't get a lot of education, but I read voraciously every book I could get my hands on. So I befriended a nurse. Her name was Lydia, and I asked her to stop by the library and check out books for me, and she did. So I would read them and give them back to her. So the librarian started sending me a list of all the best-selling books in the world, or in the United States, I guess. But anybody know what the best-selling book is? It's the Bible. Well, I didn't like the Bible, and I didn't like Christians at all. All my life, I'd been told I was stupid, I was a black sheep, I was a loser, I would never amount to anything, I was scum. And many of those people were Christians. And I did have long hair, and I didn't disagree with them, but I didn't like hearing it. I was down in the French Quarter one time, and there was a street preacher there. They're all over the French Quarter. I didn't ever pay any attention to him, but when I walked by this guy, he looked at me, and he said, "If you don't change your ways, you're going to hell." Are you talking to me? I went over there and I knocked him off that box, and I pulled out my .357. And I said, "If you ever say that to me again, I'll kill you." And my hand was shaking so bad, I almost murdered him for that. So that was my impression of Christians. And my mother was an atheist. My father was far from the Lord. I didn't ever go to church when I was a kid. And I thought the Bible was written by weak people for weak people that were afraid to die. I wasn't afraid to die. I wanted to die. And but I decided that I would read it. I thought I had the intellect where I could read the Bible, and I would get me a bunch of ammunition, and then these Bible thumpers came after me, I would shut them down. So I started reading the Old Testament, and it was so boring, I couldn't continue. I mean, this guy begat this guy and begat. And I thought, I'm not going to do this. I was just going to abandon the project. But Lydia had given me a copy of her own Bible, and as I was thumbing through it, I noticed she'd underlined all these verses in the New Testament and written little notes out and all this. And I said, well, maybe this is a better read. So I started reading the New Testament, and it was nothing like I thought it was. Jesus was all about love entirely. And it didn't matter if you were a prostitute, if you were a drunk, no matter what you were, he loved you. All these religious guys would say, oh, don't go over there, he's not one of us. That's exactly where he would go. So I was really liking him, you know. Because, you know, nobody had ever in my life, I was a grown man then, told me they loved me. Not one person. So here's Jesus saying he loves me. And in fact, he said he died for me and all that stuff. So I started reading. I read all 4 of the Gospels, and I read a couple other books. Then I came over to Philippians 4:13. It says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Well, that infuriated me. I slammed that Bible shut, and I threw it on the floor, and I rang for my nurse, and I said, get it out of here. It's nothing but a lie. And she said, what are you talking about? Now, Lydia was a great, big African-American lady. And she was not in a good mood that day. She had 5 kids she was taking care of. She'd had about 3 or 4 guys. All of them had dumped her. And She was just in a surly mood a lot, but she was good friends of mine. She put her hands on her hips and she said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, it says right here, I can do anything through Christ who strengthens me." I said, "I'm a drug addict. I'm a meth addict. I've worn out the veins in both my arms. I'm shooting up in my legs. I've done horrible things. I've never done one good thing in my life." And I hadn't. Not one good thing that I could think of. I was an alcoholic at 13 years old. She looked at me and she said, "Jesus is God. This isn't about you, it's about Him. He can do anything He wants. He made the blind see. He walked on water. He fed 5,000 people, and He raised Lazarus from the dead. And if He can do all that, He can change your sorry tale." She didn't say tail. It was much more colorful than that, I can assure you. So she picked up that Bible and dusted it off and put it back on the bed. So I laid there and I thought about it, and I said, "Well, you know what? Jesus is God, and He created me. If He wanted to change me, He could. But why would He want to? I mean, I'm scum. I'm a dope fiend. I'm a criminal." And I thought about Him being crucified. He was beaten beyond recognition. He was so bloody you couldn't recognize Him. I know what that looks like. You may not. I've done it to people, and it's not a pretty sight. He was whipped 39 times on His back by Roman soldiers. I can't even imagine what it felt like. He had a crown of thorns beat on His head. People were laughing at Him and spitting on Him and jeering Him and making fun of Him as He dragged this big heavy cross all across town, up this hill. And they took His clothes off Him, nailed Him to that cross, stood Him up in front of His mother. And they all stood out there and watched Him smothering, laughing, jeering Him. And you know what He said? "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So I asked God to come into my life. I'd taken copious notes. I prayed. I confessed my sins. I asked Him to forgive me. Everything I could think of. I know I didn't get them all, but I said, "Lord, if I left anything out, you know what it is. Forgive me." And then I vowed that I would follow Him for the rest of my life, because I wanted to change. And when I got out of the hospital, I'd been a drug addict for many years. I got off drugs and alcohol. I didn't go to rehab. I didn't go to AA. I didn't go to NA. I just made up my mind. I wanted to change my life. I read the Bible hundreds of times. I don't even know how many times I've read it, cover to cover. I read it every day, including today. And it became my mentor. That's how all my business acumen, everything I've learned. I didn't go to Wharton Business School. I didn't go to Harvard. I read the Bible. I was very antisocial. And so I didn't have a mentor other than King Solomon and Jesus Christ. So when I got out, first thing I did, got off drugs and alcohol, and I stopped the violence and many of the other things I was doing. And I met a girl that was nothing like me. She was one of these little goody two-shoes, had the idyllic life, and decorated the Christmas tree and went camping with the family, all those things I didn't do. And she'd lived in the same home all her life. So you say, "Well, what in the world would a girl like that be doing with you?" I lied to her. Actually, I just lied by omission. I wouldn't tell her. I didn't tell her for 14 years what I had done. And when I did, she was not happy about it 14 years later. But anyway, we've been married 45 years. We have 3 sons. They're all college graduates. They all love their kids immensely. They're all married to good Christian girls. Every one of them is extremely successful as a business person. And they love life and everything about it. Never were in any kind of trouble at all. Actually, my oldest son, the worst thing he ever did, we had a snowstorm, and he disappeared, and I was frantic, and I went out, and we had a big pond behind our house. There was a hole in it out there. I thought, oh my God, I was just getting ready to go dive in it and look for him, and probably would have died myself. And he came back, and he had found a little dog and taken it up to a neighbor, and he told me the other day that was the worst thing he ever did in his life. I said, oh, well, we'll forgive you for that one. But I got a job, it was the worst job in a paint plant, 18 acres, Glidden Paint Company. I was the lowest paid person out of 400 people. I worked in the bowels of this big plant in this filthy, dirty room about the size of the stage. And my job was to keep up with the paint labels for Glidden Paint Company. So it's a horrible job. Nobody else wanted it. But I went in there. I kept my head down. I was the first one there, last to leave. Cleaned that place up, painted the floor white, the ceiling white, the walls white. I bribed a maintenance man with a six-pack of beer to put fluorescent lights every 6 inches across it. It looked like a beam of light down there in that darkness. But I figured out a way to save them $50,000 a year on paint labels. And back then, that was a lot of money. So they promoted me. And then they promoted me again and again and again, 8 times, all the way up into plant management. I was the only one at the time, anyway, maybe now, that ever got in the management program at Glidden without a college degree. So I decided I wanted to start my own business. Everybody laughed at me. Everybody told me it was ridiculous. I didn't have any experience. I didn't have any education. I didn't have any money. I said, they said, you just can't do it. I said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which has become my life's motto. So I borrowed $1,000 on my credit card, and 6 months later, I had built a multi-million-dollar business, 186,000 customers around the world, and 7 distributors. I went on to create 19 more companies, and I sold one in 2008 for $75 million. I had not a penny on it. And it really gave me a look at both sides of the street, because I've slept on the side of the road up under freezing bridges and eaten in missions and gotten my clothes at the Salvation Army. And I've flown around in my own jet and stayed in the finest hotels and had every material possession anybody could want. And it does something to you. I went from making $30,000 a year to $30,000 a week. One year I made $300,000 a week. And money is not everything it's cracked up to be. It brings more problems than the problems that it solves, unless you can handle it. And getting that much money that quickly almost tempted me to leave my family and everything that got me where I was. But I fought my way through it, and the Lord slapped me around a little bit and brought me back to my senses. And I finally got off that kick and settled down. And I mentioned King Solomon. He was my mentor. I was so antisocial. I didn't know anybody. It was hard for me to make friends. And so I said, if I could have any mentor in the world, who would it be? Well, King Solomon was the richest and the wisest man who ever lived. People came from all over the world to sit at his knee and listen to him. And I said, why not him? So I started reading Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and I credit that with all my success. It's really a book of wisdom. I almost had it memorized at one point. It's my hope that you will accept Christ as your Savior and follow Him and stick with that Bible and be mentored. If there's plenty of people, there's plenty of groups of people, support groups that love you and want to help you with your walk. And I just highly recommend that everybody do that. And if you haven't ever made a decision to follow Christ, then you should do that. And I've received about every honor anybody could ever want. Businessman of the Year, Entrepreneur of the Year. I was asked to speak at Inc. 500. Our company's had such tremendous growth, 480% in 1 year. It's insane, way too much growth. And but I stood up there and told all those entrepreneurs, about 5,000 of them, I believe in faith-based companies. When I sold my company, Horizon Software, to a big company, $6 billion cap company, you could get on the elevator, and when the door opened, you'd see the 10 Commandments. You go up a floor, you'd see the 10 Commandments. You go up a floor, you'd see the 10 Commandments. The day I sold that company, they took all those down. You know what I did? I had them ship them to me. I built a big resort in Florida, and I got them hanging there today.